questions and answers session with all the speakers. So I will bring some more chairs, and I will ask all of them afterwards to come and join us, and then the floor can ask questions or give their comments. The next speaker is Azar Majidi. Azar is a writer, broadcaster, women's rights and political activist, and a lecturer in women's rights and human rights. She is the president of the Organization for Women's Liberation, an executive member of European Feminist Initiative, a European secular feminist organization, and a leader of Worker Communism Unity Party. She has worked with the International Campaign for the Defense of Women's Rights in Iran. She co-founded the Center for Women and Socialism, which published a journal called Medusa. Azar worked as the editor of Medusa from 1970 to 2002. She's worked in alternative media for 3 years, from 1999 to 2002. She was the director of Radio International, a Farsi-speaking shortwave radio broadcasting into Iran, the Middle East and Europe. She worked as a producer and broadcaster in satellite television from 2003 and 2007. Azar has published many articles in many international media, a book entitled Women's Rights versus Political Islam, and another one under the name of Iran, a Female Revolution, a Monumental Blow to Islam. I think both of them are available outside. And numerous articles in Farsi, English, French on women's rights, secularism, and socio-political situation in Iran, the Middle East, and other political issues. Azar.
Well, thanks so much. It was so inspiring, wasn't it, this slideshow? When we were making it, we just, you just couldn't sit there quietly. You just had to, bravado is what you had to do, actually give all those peoples. But what the interesting point is, when you look at all those pictures, if you don't see the name Tunisia, Algeria, Libya, Syria, Egypt, Iran, Morocco, you just see people very much alive, doing very much the same thing, asking for very much the same thing. Millions have come to the streets of Cairo. I forgot the names of capitals, my geography is bad. And Tehran and other cities asking for freedom, for justice, for equality, for a better world. This is the base of their demands. All of these people, doesn't matter whether they speak Arabic, Farsi, Kurdish, Turkish, English, doesn't matter what religion they were forced to believe. And when you see that, like every time you talk to some people and say, okay, listen, people want freedom, people want equality, people want a better world. You know what? But they're not educated enough. They need education first. They need to be trained in democracy for a while. You go to workshops, be trained in democracy, and then they can have that. And then one day, out of nowhere, out of the blue, you see people just come to the streets and ask for these demands, and they bring all their mights. The police, the army, the tanks, the thugs, camel, horse, whatever they have in their power, they bring to the square, they bring to the street to push these people back. They can't. And then you ask them who is illiterate, who is uneducated, who is the one who doesn't know and needs workshops in democracy. And you know what they do? Then they go behind the doors, they plan for you. One day from Guadeloupe, they bring the Islamist thugs to Iran and change a revolution which was for freedom, for equality, for justice into an Islamic revolution, as though people were sitting at home tired. They wanted to stone some women. So they said, let's go to the street, fight with the army, and then stone some women. Islamic revolution. And then, 30-something hours later, after for the past 10 years we were being deafened by the war against Islamic terrorism, they turned Afghanistan to ruin. Looking for who? Bin Laden. They destroyed Iraq. They turned Baghdad into a big cemetery. For what? To bring democracy to Iraq. Saddam had the weapons of mass destruction. First, they imposed sanctions on the people. After 10 years of sanction, according to Harvard or Oxford, I think Harvard is research, more than 1 million people, particularly infants, small children, and elderly, died as a result of sanction. Why? Because they wanted to find the weapons of mass destruction. Who had the weapon of mass destruction? Economic sanction? And then they bombarded the whole country. They divided them into different sects. You're Sunni, you're Shia, you're Assyrian, you're Armenian, you're Christian, you're Kurd, you're Turk, you're whatever. And then you should fight each other. Well, they call it democracy. You know what? As a socialist, as a communist who wants people to govern themselves in their councils, in their general assemblies, if they think that's democracy, I don't care. That's democracy. But that's not what people wanted. In none of these slides do you see people calling for democracy. They're asking for freedom. Because I think in the back of their mind, their head, they know there's a difference. Iraq has democracy. Okay, I'm not going to go far enough. Greece has democracy or not? Doesn't Britain have democracy? Doesn't USA have democracy? Doesn't Sweden have democracy? Have people voted themselves to be starved to death? Have people voted themselves to go and kill millions of Iraqis and Afghanis? And that's democracy. India has democracy. Turkey has democracy. That's what parliamentarian democracy is. You go vote somebody for 4 years, they go there to decide for you. They decide to starve you to death. They decide to deprive you of their rights. They decide to make public education private. They decide to take away the right of going to universities from underprivileged children, while they're still in the middle of taking any penny from any budget they can. London was a good example, wasn't it? I don't know how familiar you are with the situation there. There was this big scandal about the expenses of the parliament. All of them, from Cameron, Blair, Brown, all of them had taken something from the expense budget. The funniest one was the husband of the Home Secretary, who just even for borrowing, for renting porno DVD, had taken from his wife's budget expenses. Even, I don't know, £2, £3 to pay for that. This is what they are. This is what they really are. And she herself, see, you know, in England, apparently some prisoners have to do community service. And you know where she sent them to do community service? She sent them to her own house to paint her house. What a better community service than that? And that's democracy. That's democracy. None of these people who stole from people's money got any sentences. One of them only, after I think he had taken £30,000. He was sent to jail. A few days later, in a limousine, was out of jail. But you know what they did to those poor kids in London and riots all over England? For taking 2 bottles of water, the boy got 6 months of jail in England. For just being rude to the police, another one got 3 months. This is democracy. This is democracy, and you see it now, bare in front of you at the time of crisis. Capitalism is in deep crisis, not in Europe only, not in the United States, in the whole world, and that's what you see. Millions come to Tahrir Square, millions are fighting in Syria, people in Iran, people in Yemen, people in Syria, and what you see is happening in Greece. Every day people in Greece are fighting with the police. Now they've begun workers to take control over some hospitals and some production units and decide in their general assemblies. They're showing the way. Those workers in Greece are showing the way. What is really common between all these peoples doesn't, see, for years and years and years and years we were told, you're Iranian, so hate Arabs. We did. You're white, so hate the blacks. We did. You're black, hate the whites. They did. You're Muslim. You have nothing to do with Christians. You're Catholic, don't like the Protestants. You're Orthodox Church, then be against the Jews. You're Jew, be against the Muslim. You're Sunni, be against Shia. You're Shia, be... And what happened? One bright day, people came to the streets of Cairo and Tunisia and broke all these barriers. Broke all these barriers. They all said the same thing. How many times did you see universal freedom for everybody? That was people on the street, not us. They all said the same thing. We want freedom. We want justice. We want to get rid of dictatorship. We want to get rid of the corruption of the state. We want a better life. All broke down. The most interesting one for me was, growing up in Iran, I was taught in my school to hate Arabs, to think they're low scums. And we Persians, with our ancient culture, we're the best. They were said art is just, Iranians have the sort of, they have the ownership of the art and nobody else. We were raised by this kind of rubbish. Especially because of Islam and after the Islamic regime, and people had really turned out against Arabs, thinking it was Arabs' fault that we are under Islam. But when people came out to the streets, all of that just melted down. People came out to the street, they said, Mubarak bin Ali, now it's Said Ali's turn. That means Said Ali Khamenei. That slogan melted away all those nasty, vile nationalism against the Arabs in Iran. And I think it's happening all over the world. Now you know, there's nothing about nationalism. It's not against colonialism or imperialism or no-colonialism, whatever you want to call it. It's not against Americans. It's not against whites or reds or whatever. People want freedom. People want equality. People want a better world. People want prosperity for everybody. This is what they want. You can see it so openly and so vividly. And this is what is common with all those people who have come to the streets. And just in the last couple of minutes I have, I want to go back to Suad's speech, which was brilliant, really sharp, when she talked about moderate Islam. You see, all along they told us that people are uneducated, they're very religious, you can't have democracy for them, they don't understand what freedom is, as though there are some people who know what democracy is and they're going to teach us what it is. As soon as people come to the street and want to take everything, the matter in their own hands, they start bringing conspiracies. All of a sudden, Islamists, who were supposedly they were fighting against, they become good. You think it was a coincidence that exactly when these uprisings happened, and USA and the West and Israel, those are called state terrorism, became so worried about what's happening? Their most stable dictatorships are just lost. Do you think it was coincidence that exactly at that time they killed bin Laden? Do you really believe that they didn't know all along he was just sitting in some place very close to a very big garrison in Pakistan, very close to the capital? They killed him, so they say, no, we don't have any terrorism, Islamic terrorism. We don't have any problems with that. No, we're going to bring something, as she brilliantly called it, a magic moderate Islamists. Just taking it off of the hat, see? Yeah, they're supposed to, from now on, have a moderate polygamy, as she said it, have a moderate stoning of women, you know, just kill them slowly, killing her softly, as the song says, with those little small, nice, smooth stones, just killing them softly. This is the moderate Islam. They talked about Turkey. No, they've even taken Turkey to Somalia, and they said Turkey is going to solve the Somalia's problem. I don't know if you've seen it in the news. Now Erdogan is become the front figure of the moderate Islamists who are going to try to do the same thing they did to Iran in 1979. That time was Guadeloupe, only the statement, now they've become very Democrat. You know, they don't do it themselves. They bring some of the opposition figures into Olof Palme Center, for example, a sort of prestigious place, outside Stockholm somewhere. I don't know why, if it's going to be a workshop, why does it have to be somewhere very far away in the jungle, somewhere, so people don't find it? They've done it for Libya. They could not manipulate in Libya just the way they did in Egypt and Tunisia, by taking the head figure and bring the army and the old regime and keep it, what they did in Egypt and Tunisia. So they intervened militarily. NATO intervened in Libya and brought, if not worse, the same kind of vile, reactionary, brutal dictatorship into Libya. Some of the old regimes, some of the tribal foci, and some of the Islamists. Now they're ruling Libya. And already you can see here about the news of torture in the prisons, killing in prisons. And the first thing they did, as though that was so necessary, you know, everybody was dying to see polygamy. The first law they had was to free polygamy for men in Libya. As though all those killing and fighting was just, you know, men should have more than one wife. It's not enough, you know. Come on, you know, that's justice. And now they're doing the same in Syria. They brought some so-called Syrian opposition to the same Olof Palme Center a few months ago. They trained them, they gave them workshops in democracy, and then off you go with nice designer suits, nice designer ties, send them to UN, ask the world for military intervention. They're doing the same in Syria. And they're planning to do the same for Iran. Olof Palme Center is very active now, you know, it's very, very active in promoting democracy in the world. They brought some of the killers, murderers of this regime and the previous regime together. People who tortured political prisoners, people who killed, people who was one of the founders of the Islamic regime, and some of the people who were with previous regime who did the same. You saw some of the pictures of the previous regime killing people as well. Brought them together with some nice figures of the women's rights. Put them together. They said, we don't want to make alternatives, we just want to become friends. I don't know, why do they need to go to a place in a remote jungle outside Stockholm to become friends? Get together in Washington, get together and have coffee together and become friends. But Iran is different. Not because Iranians are the best, no. Because Iran has had a very different history. For the past 30-something years, as a result of a very great revolution that was failed by the conspiracy of the imperialist powers, Western powers, state terrorism, whatever you like to call them, they brought the Islamists, and they organized mass killings in Iran. We still don't know the extent of it, what they did in the 80s in Iran. But left the freedom-loving and communism is very strong in Iran. For the past 30 years, they've organized. They got killed, they've organized. They were tortured, they organized. They were raped, they organized. They fought militarily against the regime and also against the backward sort of so-called supporters of not the regime but the same kind of system in Kurdistan. They fought against each other for people's rights, for people's freedom, for people's equality, for women's freedom, for women's equality. Iran is very polarized politically. They cannot do that to Iran. Actually, thanks to some revolutionary left and communists in Stockholm, they found their hideout. They actually had to go and find their hideout. Nobody knew where they have their meeting, Olof Palme Center. And they exposed it. And they exposed it, and they found out they can't do that in Iran. You see, threat of war against Iran, along with making opposition for Iran. The same scenario of Libya, Syria, Iran. You can see what's happening, what they're trying to do. They call people uneducated. They don't know what democracy is. And then what they do exactly what they want as under the name of democracy. Well, I finished my talk with asking all of you, I know most of you are, just so everyone else can hear too, for solidarity with these uprisings, for freedom, equality, justice. They're not for Islamists. They want people in all those countries want freedom, want equality, want justice, same as Iran. And another thing, we should stand firmly against any military attack against Syria and Iran as well. And I know it's people say, well, it takes 30 years. I don't know how many years it takes, but I've learned, living through a revolution in Iran, that people's psychology changes overnight when that moment comes. When that moment comes due to the change of dynamism in the society, whatever it is, that people come in hundreds, in thousands, in millions, people change. These moments, moments of uprising, moments to fight for freedom, brings the best in people. And this is what you're seeing, and this is what we have to try to maintain. Thank you so much.